Hi, I'm Rick Dior, and today we're going to talk about some of these old A's or A Zildjians that I own. I've spoken about them in the past, but I managed to find all of them. They were in different locations and get them all together here for you today. So most of these are ride cymbals, although I do probably have about 20 of these older A's. And when I say old A's, I'm talking about A Zildjians from the 40s, 50s, and 60s. In the 70s, I think they got a little bit heavier and they sounded, more geared towards rock and roll. But the older A's from the 50s, especially, to me are fantastic sounding cymbals. My teacher, Joe Morello, played older A's, and I loved his cymbals. They were much darker than the modern ones that we hear today. Now, one thing the older ones have in common with each other is that they're very thin compared to the newer ones. This is the most recent one that I put up here. This one's from the 60s. And you might notice I don't clean these. They're pretty dirty. Some are almost horribly so. This one looks like it's got some bird droppings on it. And I got them like that. So all of these I bought used. And none of them have any cracks, but there are flea bites on the edges, which I have not repaired. Scratches. In the old days, drummers would just take these things. They didn't use cymbal cases. They just throw them in the side of a trap case. There was a little compartment there for cymbals. At the end of the gig, they, just take them, throw them in there, and just throw it in your car. It's very kind of carefree. Only in modern times did people start caring about, I think anyway, about the cymbals where they carried them in heavier cases, and I certainly care about all my cymbals. But I don't clean these because they have a certain sound to them. And I know from the past when I have cleaned them, it takes all of this dirt off and the cymbals tend to sound a lot ringier and brighter and basically just more annoying overall. So I leave them kind of dirty, and usually on a gig, the only one who sees them is me because I'm looking right at them. The audience doesn't see them. They might see the bottoms, which actually look better than the tops in this case. So I'm not so worried about that. These hi-hats are filthy. I always wondered if someone buried these. In the old days, guys used to bury their cymbals to get them all dirty. That's nuts. And I knew one guy, he buried a bunch of cymbals and then he forgot where he buried them. And then obviously they're underground somewhere in New Jersey. So, you guys can go on a treasure hunt. And those were K's. So somewhere in Metuchen or Edison, New Jersey, there's a bunch of buried K Zildjian cymbals. So these A's right here are 13s, these hi-hats I'm talking about, and they are from the 1950s, and they're extremely thin, even thinner than the K Zildjians, the 13s that I have. So, like I said, in the old days, they'd made very, very thin cymbals. This particular splash is from the 1940s, and you see this, it's literally like paper, but it sounds great. So if you listen to any of those old big band recordings or kind of Dixieland recordings where they use a splash, that's the sound. That's what you want to look for. An old 1940s or even 30s A Zildjian. Now, they started making these a lot earlier than people think, in the early 1900s, and the stamps changed. That's how you know what cymbal you have, what age. So these cymbals here, this is a 24, and these are large stamps. So I'll put a picture here on the screen so you can see it. And there's a hollow stamp. There's also a large stamp that's not always hollow. By hollow, I mean it's almost like... well, you'll see from the stamp here. I don't know if I can describe it properly, but it's got space in between the letters. And this one is, I think, a little bit older. This does not have the hollow. It has the large stamp like the 50s, but it's not hollow. So I'll put these both up there so you can see. It's pretty interesting. Now, a lot of these stamps, they're all different. Sometimes there's errors I've seen, like mistaken stamps where they put two stamps on there, or they put the actual logo in a weird place. So you'll see that too in a lot of these old days. I think they were made very quickly and they just stamped them and then that was pretty much it. So this one, I feel like is the oldest one here. This could be from the 40s. It's pretty thin. I did pop these rivets in here when I got it. Was actually doing an experiment with putting them closer to the bell. So normally I'll put my rivets about 1.5 inches from the end, but here I wanted to put them closer, and it worked out great, actually. I love this cymbal. I'll play it a little for you. So I felt like putting the rivets closer to the bell, in other words, it's not real close, but you see where they are, would not make it as rivety, not make it as shimmery. And it worked. So that's something you can try, if you have an extra cymbal laying around. This happens to be a really good sizzle cymbal because it's got a little bit of weight to it. So what you always want is for those sizzles not to just stop, to just fade out. And that's what we get here. So that's the only sizzle that I have for an A here. Now this one, like I think I said before, is probably from the 60s. You can see the difference in the lathing a little bit. The later ones are a little more perfect looking, I feel like. And the lathing is a little thinner. So these are good. These are good cymbals, the 60s A's, and the stamp is smaller. So I'll put a picture of that on the screen too. But this cymbal is very articulate. So it's a little more modern sounding than the older ones. It's got a little more bite, a little more top end. Now this 24 is one of my favorite cymbals, period. It's got a really unique kind of sound. It's almost like an A or a K hybrid. It looks like it's hammered a little. And some of these old cymbals, the old A's, look like that. I'll play a little bit of this one. Got a real dark bell compared to a 60s bell and this other bell, which is super dry. So that has a lot to do with the size of the cymbal, obviously. Now this is a really old 15-inch A crash, very, very thin. Again, you can bend it. So you can really lay into it. It's a lot of fun to play this cymbal. And it's tough, too. I've hit it pretty hard and never any problems. And, of course, we talked about the splash earlier. These sound really good together. So those are my preferred A Zildjians that I like to use. And I do use these on gigs and recordings sometimes. It's a little bit of a different sound. Now, a lot of you have asked me the differences between the old Ks and the old As. So we're going to show you. Since this is the newest A, I'm going to take this off. Excuse me. And I'm going to put an old K up here. And I'm going to put a 21-inch K. So this is the cymbal you all know about. Okay, it's got this keyhole thing I showed you when we did our jazz ride cymbal video, or the ride cymbal video. And a lot of these Ks would have keyholes because the metal was much softer. All right, so we'll play a little of this and then we'll play the other one so you can hear it. I know you hear the difference there, how dark this old K is, and we'll move it like that. So an interesting combination. They're all dark, but this one is the darkest. Of course, you can mix and match these old Ks with these old As. They actually work really well together. What I wouldn't mix would be an older K with a newer A. They're just too heavy, in my opinion. The ones I've heard and the ones I've played. They're not bad. They're great for specific kinds of music. So we're going to put this one back up here. Now, one thing about the A's is that you can hit them a bit harder and not worry about cracking them. I don't run across a lot of A's that are keyholed and cracked. I think that had something to do with the alloy. I've seen some, but it's pretty rare. All of these have no keyholes and no cracks. But every single one of the K's that I have either a crack or a keyhole, sometimes bad, like you see here. How bad that one is. And I fixed that. I got it like that. It actually had a crack. and I took it out. Now, it's been like this for many, many years, and I haven't had any problems. But the guy I got it from was using it in a pretty heavy rock band and was crashing it pretty hard. So that's probably what happened there. So I think I covered everything I wanted to hear about these. I know, like I said, you've asked me a lot of questions about them, and I've talked about them, but I've never got them all together. When you're looking for these online, I would definitely suggest making sure you have a sound file that you can listen to. That's not always accurate either, depending on the mics. The mic setup I'm using here is very simple. It's 2 overheads and a bass drum mic. That's it. So, and they're far away from the cymbals. They're not really close on them. Excuse me. A lot of times what will happen is they'll use a mic that has a high-end peak on it, like around 5 to 10K and kilohertz, that is. And what happens there is that the cymbal sounds a lot different than when you get it. So it's hit and miss. But the things you want to listen for when you're buying these things is any sort of hum. Now, luckily, the old A's don't hum nearly as much as the old K's, especially the thin ones. There's no issues with these at all as far as that goes. They're all very, very pure in their sound, but they do have a lot more top-end shimmer than the old hammered cymbals, and even the new hammered cymbals. So it's a really desirable sound. Now, if you want to hear some of the old A's, any old Dave Brubeck record with Morello, those are the older A's. If you want to hear those, he didn't use K's, he used A's. So that's if you want to hear them. Apologize for my voice. I have a little bit of a sore throat here, but it's not COVID. All right, so I'm just going to play a little for you, and hope you enjoyed this. Hope this answered some of your questions, and they're great cymbals, the A's. The new ones are fine, but the old ones are fantastic. So if you can find one from the 50s, I feel like that's the best vintage.